You know that any polynomial, if it has roots a and b, you can write the polynomial, or well, not polynomial, like a quadratic for example, you will write it like this, right? A quadratic with roots a and b, you can write it like this, right? But this is not all possible quadratics with roots a and b or zeros a and b, because you can multiply this by any constant you want. So I can do k times x minus a into x minus b, right? Now, so this is my function. As long as I know the function has roots x a and b, then I can write the polynomial expression like this. Suppose it has roots a, b, c, I can write it like this. If it has roots a, b, c, d, e, f, you can write k times x minus a, x minus b, x minus c, x minus d, and so on, right? As long as it's a finite polynomial, it is very clear. For an infinite polynomial, it is not so clear. Okay, but we'll assume that you can extend this idea, and there are problems with that assumption. But there is also a problem, because if you have infinite such multiplications, then you have x, x, x multiplying. The only thing you can multiply reasonably well with infinite times, is 1, and not get into any kind of mess. So I can do 1 plus x into 1 plus x square into 1 plus x cube. That's not a problem. Okay. So how do I get this into some kind of a form like 1? Well, you can flip this. Instead of writing it like this way, can I also write it as k dash? Okay, so I'll call this k dash, so I'll call this k. Can I write it like this? X minus a minus x into b minus x into c minus x. This is okay, right? And you can pull out the ABC inside this. And so let me call this k double dash into this form. So if I pull out the ABC, I'll get k double dash ABC into 1 minus x by a, 1 minus x by b into 1 minus x by c. What is the advantage of a form like this? Everything is 1 minus 1 minus. Hopefully if these fellows go to 0 as we progress, then it will all be multiplied by 1, 1, 1, so it will be fine. It has a chance of being fine. It may still not be fine, but it has a chance of being fine. If it was multiplied by 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, well, it's not going to get any finite answer anyway. For it to converge, this must, the last few products, definitely as you go further, not last few products, as you go beyond a point, you should get the multiplying factor as 1. So the number is reasonable. For example, you can find the answer to this question. What is 1 plus x into 1 plus x square into 1 plus x power 4 into 1 plus x power 8, x power 16, and so on? What will be the answer? Suppose I want to find out what is p. What will be p? Just think about, if you multiply by something here, it should all just cancel or become something that is very easy. Well, look at this. What should I do? I should multiply by what? 1 minus x. Why? Because then this will become 1 minus x square. 1 minus x square into 1 plus x square, 1 minus x power 4. 1 minus x power 4, 1 minus x, 1 plus x power 4, 1 minus x power 8, 1 minus x power 16, 1 minus x power 32, etc. 1 minus x power infinity. Hopefully x is less than 1. So that x power infinity is 0. So then this will all become 1. So if I multiply by 1 minus x, it will become 1. So what should this be? 1 by 1 minus x. Now this is clear, right? Now this is a very standard trick. By the way, you have been using this for that cos 2 theta, cos 4 theta, cos 8 theta. What are you doing? Multiply by sin theta or sin 2 theta. If it was cos theta, it started with cos theta. Multiply by sin theta. So that it will become sin 2 theta, then it will become sin 4 theta, then it will become sin 8 theta. So the last one will become sin 2 power n theta. Correct. Same logic you can use here. So people like this idea that I can convert all of this into 1 minus form. I am rewriting the same idea that you already know, by the way. So far, nothing new. I am not saying anything new. I am just saying you already know this, which means you know this. It's just written in a slightly different form. And this is a very useful thing to think about. That just rewriting it in a form like this allows us to extend this to infinity. This way you can't extend to infinity, can you see? Well, what will I do with the next term, next term? How will I multiply if I have infinite such terms? Tough. How will I multiply if I have infinite such terms? Not so tough. You just did one. Okay. So if I look at this, I can say that a function with roots a, b, c, d, e, f, etc. must look like k times 1 minus x by a, 1 minus x by b, 1 minus x by c, 1 minus x by d, and so on. As long as this function was a polynomial. Now, I don't know if sin x is a polynomial, right? But broad level, let us assume that this is true. So, if sin x was a polynomial, let us think about the graph of sin x. Let us think about the graph of sin x. How does the graph of sin x look? So, it starts like that, goes like this, goes like that, goes like that, and goes like that. Correct? It has zeros at 0. It has a 0 at pi. It has a 0 at 2 pi. And it has a 0 at 3 pi, 4 pi, minus 2 pi, etc. The first problem is it has a 0 at 0. So that means this is a problem. Okay, but let us take the first term alone and keep it aside. So if you leave the first term for sin x, it should have been x minus 0. So call that x. So sin x, if I wanted to expand sin x, it must look like, the first term I am just going to call it as x. Because otherwise if I write it as 1 minus x by a, it will end up in lots of trouble. So it is going to be some constant times, now this is an assumption, that you can write sin x as a product of 1 minus and so on. It's a polynomial expansion kind of possibility. Okay, so we are going to make that assumption. So k times x, this part I have not moved. So only these I am going to convert as 1 minus x by b, 1 minus x by c. I am going to therefore take out all those x by b, x by c, bc parts here, right? All that will go into a constant. So that constant is sitting here. I don't know what this constant is, but it's going to look like this. Into, and what is interesting is 1 minus x by pi. Because the first root is pi. Well, what do you mean by first root? This is also the first root. First root away from the origin. So write the next one like this. 1 plus x by pi. Because it's 1 minus x by minus pi. Bundle. Now these are all problematic because an infinite product or infinite series, if you change the order, really gets messed up. So only if you do it like this, it will work nicely. Because if you tried 1 minus x by pi into 1 minus x by 2 pi, 1 minus x by 3 pi, that diverges. But if you did this, it beautifully converges. Okay, so sometimes it requires somebody like Euler to say, let's not take this root, this root, this root, this root. Let us take these two roots, then let's take those two roots, then let's take those two roots. Okay, isn't it the same as taking all these and then taking all that? It is, but with infinity, the problem is you may never come back to this one, no? You have to go all the way to infinity before you come. So Euler somehow figured out that if you choose these two first, then choose those two, you are approximating this curve by a sequence of polynomials. And those polynomials tend to become very, very close as you make more and more of these roots taken up that way. So for example, if I just took this and this, you will end up with a curve which is a cubic. It has only 3 roots. So the curve will look like this. Which is not quite like sin x. So you put 2 more roots. So then this will go bend like that. And then this will go bend like this. Put 2 more roots and so on. And as it goes closer and closer, these things will start to match. So finally, you will end up with a overall polynomial, which is, or not polynomial, infinite product, which turns out to be exactly the sin x curve. Okay, so this is 1 minus x by 2 pi into 1 plus x by 2 pi, 1 minus x by 3 pi, 1 plus x by 3 pi, and so on. And if you see this, this is k times x into 1 minus x square by pi square, 1 minus x square by 4 pi square or 2 square pi square, 1 minus x square by 3 square pi square, all the way to infinity. So sin x behaves like this for some k. Now this is an assumption, almost an assumption, but do you see it has the same roots as sin x. Sin x has a 0 at x equals 0, yes. This has a 0 at x is equal to pi and minus pi, 2 pi and minus 2 pi, 3 pi and minus 3 pi. So it has all these zeros. But wait a minute, why can't there be something which does that and comes this way and does this and comes that way? In principle it can. Okay, so in some sense this is not yet proof, because there can be multiple functions with the same set of zeros. If it was absolutely a polynomial, yes, there is only one possible answer. But sin x is not a polynomial. And this is not finite, this is infinite. If it was a polynomial, you can say two polynomials with the same with the same roots, and you have one more basically where the value where they are exactly equal, they must be identical. You know all this, we have used that quite a lot. But are these polynomials? No, these are infinite products. How can you call them polynomials? So they are really not polynomials. So you can't decide directly based on that. But let us assume that this thing is true. Now then what is the problem? When x is very, very small, I still need to figure out what is k, right? When x is very, very small, sin x behaves like x, or sin x by x is 1 when x is going to 0. So Euler knew this. So bring this down and make the limit as x goes to 0. Well, this is 0, 0, 0, 0. So this is all 1 into k. So k must be equal to sin x by x limit. So k must be 1. So k is 1. Okay. So you have this very beautiful identity for sin x. It is a product identity. Actually, this was done way before anybody fully understood or appreciated multiple kind of products of this kind. And Euler used this for something fantastic. So so you see this graph has such a lot of value, because the moment you know a little bit about the graph, somebody like Euler is able to take this and put it into a form like this. Okay, this is not proof. There are problems with it because this is an infinite product. So how are you so sure it will work? Like all these questions are there. Luckily it works. Okay, now let us take from here something else that Euler did. And this was already reasonably well known. You can write sin x as an infinite series. Okay, and you can create the series quite easily, by the way. Suppose it was at 0, right? So if I write this as a plus bx plus cx square plus dx cube, let's assume this was actually like a polynomial. Well, we're making like that kind of an assumption here, right? Except it's not a regular polynomial, it's an infinite series. So you shouldn't be calling it polynomial. So if I look at this, at x is 0, all this will be 0. So what should a be? If this is true, a has to be 0. So okay, let's get rid of a. Okay, you can divide by x and ask the question, when x is very small, sin x by x is 1, this is going to have a cx, this is going to have a dx square, all that will be 0. So b should be what? 1. You know that sin x by x is 1. Sin x behaves like x. Or if you know a little bit of differentiation, you can say, let me differentiate, I'll get cos x. Cos x is b plus 2cx plus 3dx square and so on. And now put x is 0. X is 0, all this is 0, so cos 0 is 1. So therefore b must be 1. Okay, so now we find b is 1. How will I find c? Same trick again, differentiate. If you differentiate, this is going to become minus sin x. 0 plus 2c plus 6dx plus, well, if I wanted to call this E, well, let's not use E, let's call it F. E is for Euler's formula, right? So for Euler's number. So this basically becomes 4fx power 3, and when I differentiate it here, it's going to become 12fx square. Correct? Now at this point, put x is 0. I'm only counting values at 0. You notice this. I'm not looking for any other value, and that is going to tell us something very, very powerful, and I'll tell you what that means a little later. I mean today itself, right now. But if I put x is 0, this is 0, this is also 0, so what does it tell you about c? C must be 0. So c must be 0. But if c is 0, this is gone. There is no x squared term in the expansion of sin x. Because you see, 0, it must match. And so, but this is 2c, so c must be 0. So, where if c is 0, this is gone. This is anyway gone. How do I find d? Differentiate again. So, if I differentiate, this is going to become minus cos x. And minus cos x must be 6d. Plus, by the way, this is what is 6d? It is actually 3 factorial. And what is this going to be? 12 into 2, so it's going to be 24 fx 4 factorial. Why 4 factorial? Because every time you see this is going to be 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. The reason this became 6 was it was 3 into 2 into 1. After that it will be multiplied by 0 and gone. It won't come into the picture. But anyway, when I put x is 0, all these fellows go away. What are you left with? 1. Cos 0 is 1. So minus 1 by 6. Minus 1 by 6. So that means d is minus 1 by 6. So I can go there and substitute minus 1 by 6. Correct? Agreed? If I want f, then I look at the next one, differentiate again, this is going to be minus sign. Can you see that it will be 24f? What will f be? 0. So this is gone. The next term will be plus 1 by, this is 3 factorial, there is no 4 factorial, there is going to be a 5 factorial. 1 by 5 factorial x power 5. So that means we've just also found out that sin x can be written as x minus x cube by 3 factorial, okay, plus x power 5 by 5 factorial minus x power 7 by 7 factorial and so on. And you can see that there is a pattern here. You will find a similar kind of pattern for cos with all the missing fellows. 1 is missing. So it will turn out that for cos x, you can write this as 1 minus x square by 2 factorial, which is why cos x behaves like 1. 2 factorial basically is just simply 2. Okay. But the second term in cos is not x term, it is an x square term. The second term in sin x is not x square but x cube. By the way, this will become very useful when you're doing calculus and limits. It comes partly from calculus and limits, but it goes back to calculus and limits. Anyway, plus x power 4 by 4 factorial minus x power 6 by 6 factorial and so on. By the way, if I put instead of x, if I call it I theta, this will be I theta. This will be I cube, right? So it will be plus I cube theta cube plus I power 5 theta power 5 plus I power 7 theta power 7. Is that correct or wrong? No? Sorry. I'm messing up. I times, not I power. I times. Okay. So because obviously it can't be I power 7 because it's already there. Okay. Now I'm saying I power 7 as a minus I. So this will be a minus I. This will be a plus I. This will be a minus I. This will be a plus I. So it will be I times with all these fellows plus. And if I put an I here, it will be, what is this? It will be 1 plus theta square by 2 factorial plus theta power 4. So everything is plus. So if you add the 2 up, right, with I times for this multiplied, you will see that you will get that e power I theta form. So in fact, for e power x, you can write this as 1 plus x by 1 factorial plus x square by 2 factorial plus x cube by 3 factorial. Okay, so now if I put x is I theta, you will get these two expansions, because e power I theta is cos theta plus I sin theta. So in this expansion, if I put I theta, sorry, not in this expansion, in that expansion if you put I theta, it will split up into two parts. The cos part will be this and the I sin part will be this with the I. It will correctly match out, and you can directly derive the sine function expansion from e power x expansion. If you know that Euler's formula, e power I theta is cos theta plus I sin theta. Anyway, the reason I kind of brought this up is if you multiply this, right, the first term, you can directly multiply, you can try to directly multiply this. How will I get an expansion for this? X into 1 into 1 into 1 into 1 into 1, x. So it should match with x there. It does no. What about the next term? You will never get an x square term, because you see, I can get an x square from here, but then after that I should take 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Then I'll anyway multiply by x. So what is the next term that you will get? X cube. So if I get an x cube, how will I get an x cube? 1x and then x square. After that 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Or 1x, x square by 2 square, pi square, and then everything else 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Right? So that means minus, because all of them had a minus, x cube times, and let me take all the pi square also outside. Okay, so look at what we are going to get. When I multiply these two, I'm going to get a 1 by 1 square. When I multiply this and this, 1 by 2 square. When I multiply this and that, 1 by 3 square. So this is going to be the same as that fellow's x cube term. Now that means that 1 by 1 square plus 1 by 2 square plus 1 by 3 square, 1 by 1 square plus 1 by 2 square plus 1 by 3 square is minus 1 by pi into minus 1 by pi square must be the same as minus 1 by 6. We will get rid of the 1 by 6, 1 by 6. So it must be pi square by 6. Okay, and this relationship, people had no clue how to derive something like this. There was a big problem saying, can we do sum of 1 by 1 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 3 becomes infinity. Okay, and it's very easy to derive this. We can find the answer to this one. Will you find the answer to that one? Not so easy. Not so easy. Okay, think about this. This comes from some other expansion.
That is 2 by 4. 1 by 2 is nothing but 2 by 4.
Then what will you do? Okay, think about this. Let's not do it right now. Okay, but you can find an expansion for this. Okay, but let us look at that one. I don't know, do you guys know the expansion for logarithm? Log of 1 plus x. Okay, if you know, you can derive it quite quickly. But even otherwise, you can try and figure this out separately. But people had figured this out earlier. Okay, now next step was to try plus plus plus. Obviously, that becomes infinity. But the question was, can we do this? It's finite. But how do you find out what the answer was? So Euler came up with this expression to derive the answer to this question. By the way, this expression is actually a lot more useful, because not only does it tell you the answer for sum of 1 by squares, right? So this is called sigma 1 by n square. You can also derive sigma 1 by n power 4. You can derive sigma 1 by n power 6. For all the even terms, you can use this kind of thing to do some calculation and find out. Anyway, so infinite products turn out to be quite useful. It has its dangers. So modern mathematics, people don't start with this, whether this proof is no longer accepted because it has too many holes in it. But if you want to think and you want to use it, you should go back to these things. If it was good for Euler, it's good for all of us. Unless you are going to write a professional mathematics paper, all this is good way to think. Okay, it is very useful to think about an infinite series expansion. It has its problems. Does it converge? Does it have a problem somewhere else? All of those are questions we should answer, but that's at the later stage. When you're learning about functions and infinities, actually it is good fun to go back to what people tried to do at that point of time, because they were struggling with these things and they came up with some very cool ways of solving the problem. Euler did solve the problem. This is correct. Okay, even this is correct. His reasoning for why this is correct is not correct. But the reasoning still has some logic, no? Just think about it. This is a root, that is a root. This is a root, this is a root. Some logic for why you will end up with this. There are gaps, but once you fill in the gaps, it becomes better. Okay, so I hope the basic idea is clear. Did you also see what we did there? Okay, there is something amazing. If you think a little about that idea, there is something really amazing about this. It is telling you that if I know the value of the function at x is 0, well, I only knew about the sin x value, and I knew the value of the function differentiation at x is 0, which requires me to know a little bit more, and I knew the value of the function second derivative at x is 0, third derivative, fourth derivative, infinite derivative, which means if the functions kind of I knew from here to there, like a small interval, that means this function is decided here, there, everywhere else. So what is this saying? This is saying if you know this much, you can no longer draw a different function. Not possible. But it's just possible, I just drew it. But this thing is telling you that if you know the function really well, what does really well mean? I know the value, I know the first derivative, second derivative, third derivative, infinite derivative, which means I know its slope and the slope of the slope, etc. But all of them only here. I don't know it at x is 1. Why is it saying that you can't have two functions? Because it's giving me a unique value. What does it mean? It means a function which is infinitely differentiable is actually a very small set of possibilities. If it is very smooth, that is infinitely differentiable, once you know these values, you really do know all the other values. If this is the function, this has to be the function. You can't have one more. The other one that you are going to have, another function, if at any particular point you decide to go up or down, at some point you will find that it is not differentiable. It cannot be infinitely differentiable. So any infinitely differentiable function is extremely restricted. There aren't too many such functions. So basically just knowing the function well enough in one region predicts the function everywhere else. So you cannot choose the function however you feel like. If you did, it won't be infinitely differentiable. If it is infinitely differentiable, you can't choose it. That means you know it here, it is predicted everywhere else. But it's quite amazing that you can have so many different kinds of graphs, but the moment I choose to change this a little bit here, the whole function will have to change. Once I know this is the function, I may not know the answer directly, but inside the mathematics, the value here is fixed. You cannot set it anymore. Once I tell you it is infinitely differentiable. By the way, that's a mind-blowing idea if you think about it. And for a long time, this matched with what people were doing in physics. Because if you look at what Newton and others were doing, if you know the exact velocity and you know the exact position of lots of particles, you will know exactly where this particle will be 10,000 years later. It's a deterministic world. Unfortunately or fortunately, our world is not deterministic, even at the fundamental level, because everything now runs on probabilities, right? But functions are deterministics. Not all functions, but functions that are infinitely differentiable are deterministic. And by the way, the same idea will also land up later when you have complex functions of complex numbers. It's called an entire function. So it exists all over. There are no points where it becomes discontinuous. Then such a function, it's called an analytic function, If you know it in a small region, it has to be this everywhere else. You can actually fix it everywhere else. Okay, so this idea that if you know it somewhere, you will know it everywhere is a very powerful idea that will keep coming back. You will use it. You will learn it as Maclaurin series, Taylor series, etc. in 12th standard, and a little bit probably this year also. But what you will find is that people won't explain enough about what is the big deal about this. The point that just knowing the function at one place means you know the full function tells you something about how special infinitely differentiable functions are. Functions that you can keep on differentiating you can't have any function that you choose. These functions have to be infinitely differentiable. There are infinite varieties of these functions, correct. But once you know it here, you know it everywhere. Right? So that itself restricts this type of function a lot. Anyway, so sin x, cos x, tan x, well not quite tan x, but sin x and cos x definitely are functions of that kind. So that means they are very special functions, and so if you know them in one region, you know them everywhere.